I'm Bob at I Like to Make Stuff. Today I'm going to make a mobile supply cart that can hold all my clamps. I'm finally starting to organize the shop, and I was thinking about building a clamp rack over there and then a rack over there to hold sandpaper and glue, but then it dawned on me that I should just make one rolling cart that holds all of the common supplies that I use on most projects. So what I'm thinking right now is some sort of a rolling A-frame cart with clamps on one side and a French cleat system on the other side. That'll allow me to create any sort of specific container that I need, and I can roll all of the common supplies that I use to the project that I'm working on. We'll call this like a supply cart, maybe, something like that. I don't know. Let's build it. I started out with a really basic sketch just to figure out how many 2x4s and how much plywood I would need. I cut down a couple of them to 5 feet long and then laid them out on the table end to end. I got the outside edges 2 feet apart and then used a straight edge from point to point to draw a diagonal on the bottom of each piece. I set the angle of the miter saw to match the line and then cut an angle on both of these pieces. I cut the same angle on both ends of a 2-foot 2x4 to use as the bottom cross brace. I held this against all of the edges and drove in some decking screws to lock it together. I put a scrap of 1/2-inch plywood underneath the top of this and then traced out the profile. Then I just cut along those lines with a jigsaw and screwed it onto the outside of the 2x4s. I didn't use any glue on this in case I needed to take it apart, but that would certainly make it even that much stronger. I made one of these and then another duplicate exactly the same way. I started some longer screws in the end of some 4-foot 2x4s and then used these as cross braces to attach my two frames. On the clamp side of this rack, I started at the bottom, then I added one at the top to give it structure, then I split the difference between those into 3 sections. I added 2 more on that side, and then 1 more 2x4 on the opposite bottom to give it strength. I'm kind of just making this up as I go along, so I'm really trying to figure out this side. The other side for the clamps is really pretty much finished. I really just wanted to put some cross pieces to let the clamps hang on there by gravity. On this side though, I'm going to do the French cleat system. I don't want to put an entire panel of plywood and then put the cleats on top of that because it just adds weight. So I'm going to stretch some cleats across this whole span, but that means that they need a center spine to reinforce them so they don't flex. So what I'm thinking now is putting some sort of a shelf across the top, using that to anchor a center spine to run down and then put the cleats on top of that. I cut a shelf out of some 1/2-inch plywood and then screwed it up into the gussets I had already put on the inside of each one of the frames. I used a protractor to find the angle that the legs were at, transferred it to the center 2x4, and used it to set the miter saw. I cut that angle on the top and bottom of the 2x4 and then held it in place, driving in some screws from the top and up through the bottom. Next up were the French cleats, and these are really just strips of wood with a 45-degree angle on the top. I cut quite a few of them because they act as the cleat on the wall and the cleat on the thing that you're hanging. I screwed on the first cleat near the bottom, making sure that it was level all the way across and not sitting at an angle. Then I used a board that was a 2-inch spacer on top of it before screwing on the next cleat. I followed the same process all the way up, using the spacer to place the next cleat. Once I got the entire side done, I actually used the cleat as a guard on the top shelf. After that, I laid the whole thing on its side and added some 3-inch casters to each one of the corners. This thing rolls around really easily and is going to be a great addition. I decided to start by making a few really simple containers to put on the French cleat wall just as examples. And the first one is really just a box. I cut down some more 1/2-inch plywood to make a very simple box, and I made sure that it was wide enough to put in my sanding pads. The important thing here is that when you add the cleat, it's sitting in the opposite orientation that they do on the wall. I figured I'd take advantage of my laser and make some dividers for the different grit of sandpaper as well. Big thanks to RZ Mask for sponsoring this video. I've always been really bad about wearing a respirator when I do woodwork, and they sent me this thing to try out. This is the M2, and it's actually really comfortable and easy to wear, even for people with beards. It's got active carbon filters on the inside that last for about 40 hours, but when they're done, you can just pull them out and stick in a new one. They've also got exhalation valves to expel moisture so your glasses won't fog up. It filters down to 0.1 micron, so it's good for dust and smoke and fumes and odors and all sorts of stuff. Good for woodworking and metalworking and a bunch of other things. It's got a Velcro strap, so it's really easy to get on and off. It's not a hassle, which makes me much more likely to wear it. It's a great piece of safety gear, and honestly, your health is worth it. Go to rzmask.com, use the code MAKESTUFF, and you get 15% off your entire order. Thanks, RZ Mask. There's tons of area on this thing to add specific storage. In fact, here I just screwed on a piece of plywood and it gave me a great place to clamp on all my spring clamps. I also wanted to make a couple of really general storage devices for the French cleat wall, and in this case I just took a piece of plywood and screwed on 3 magnetic strips before putting on a cleat on the back of it. These strips are strong enough to hold all sorts of metal tools, and so I loaded them up with some examples and put it on the wall. And they stay in place perfectly even when the cart is rolling around. Another really simple one is just a piece of pegboard with a cleat on the back. This actually worked way better than I expected and gives me a lot of options. Basically, it's just super flexible and you can build any sort of a container that you need, and you can change it as often as you want. Even within all these extra spaces, just the faces of things, you can screw on little holders and add little brackets and all sorts of stuff to hold anything that you need. Now I've got all of my clamps on this thing and it still moves freely. It's not top heavy. It doesn't feel like it's gonna fall over on the other side. It's very, very stable and flexible, which for me is perfect. Now probably on my live stream on Twitch, we'll be building some more containers and different unique things to put on here, so if you want to check that out, there'll be a link down in the description for my Twitch stream. There is one thing that this is missing that I think it really, really needs, and that's a ridiculous name. There's a perfect spot right here for a big stenciled name, so if you have some ideas for the name for this cart, leave them down in the comments. I'm really happy with this thing. It immediately made my shop more organized and more flexible. I can take this to where I'm working, which is really fantastic. I've got lots of other types of projects. If you want to check them out, you can see videos right here. And don't forget to subscribe. That's it for this one, guys. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.